Bantam Audio Publishing presents a double-day production of Foundation and Empire by Isaac Asimov. The Galactic Empire was falling. It was a colossal empire, stretching across millions of worlds from arm end to arm end of the mighty multi-spiral that was the Milky Way. Its fall was colossal, too, and a long one, for it had a long way to go. It had been falling for centuries before one man became aware of that fall. That man was Hari Seldon. Hari Seldon had developed and brought to its highest pitch the science of psychohistory. Psychohistory dealt not with man, but man masses. It was the science of mobs in their billions. It could forecast reactions to all kinds of stimuli with accuracy. The reaction of one man can be forecast by no known mathematics. The reaction of a billion is something else. Hari Seldon plotted the social and economic trends of the time and foresaw the continuing fall of civilization and the gap of 30,000 years that had to elapse before a struggling new empire could emerge from the ruins. It was too late to stop the fall, but not too late to narrow the gap of barbarism. Seldon established two foundations at opposite ends of the galaxy, and located them so that in one short millennium events would knit and mesh so as to force out of the foundations a stronger, more permanent, more benevolent second empire. The first foundation began as a settlement of physical scientists on Terminus, a planet at the extreme end of one of the spiral arms of the galaxy. Removed from the turmoil of the empire, scientists worked as compilers of a universal compendium of knowledge, the Encyclopedia Galactica, unaware of the deeper role planned for them by the already dead Seldon. As the empire rotted, the outer regions, or periphery, fell into the hands of independent kings. The foundation was threatened by them. However, by playing one petty ruler against another, they maintained a precarious independence. As sole possessors of nuclear power, they even established an ascendancy. The foundation became the religious center of the neighboring kingdoms. Slowly, the foundation developed a trading economy as the encyclopedia receded into the background. The foundation's traders, dealing in nuclear gadgets that not even the empire in its heyday could have duplicated for compactness, penetrated hundreds of light years through the periphery. At the end of 200 years, the Foundation was the most powerful state in the galaxy, except for the remains of the Empire, which, concentrated in the inner third of the Milky Way, still controlled 3/4 of the population and wealth of the universe. It seemed inevitable that the next danger the Foundation would have to face was the final lash of the dying Empire. The way must be cleared for the battle of Foundation and Empire. Book 1, The General. According to the Encyclopedia Galactica, Bel Rios in his relatively short career earned the title of the last of the Imperials and earned it well. That he was born in the days of the decline of the Empire made it all but impossible for him to make his mark as a conqueror, yet he had his chance when, the first of the Empire's generals to do so, he faced the Foundation's. General Bel Rios traveled without escort, which is not what court etiquette prescribes for the head of a fleet stationed in a stellar system on the marches of the Galactic Empire to the planet Sowena. He left his dowdy ground car and walked up to the door of the fading mansion that was his destination. The door opened. Bel Rios smiled at the old man. "I am Rios." "I recognize you," the old man said. "Your business?" Rios withdrew a step in a gesture of submission. One of peace. If you are Dusimbar, I ask the favor of conversation." Dusimbar stepped aside, and the walls inside his home suddenly pulsated with light. The general entered into daylight, and was soon in the study. Dusimbar proffered a chair, and both men sat down. Bar said deliberately, "I am not in the possession of love charms or potions, nor am I capable of influencing the favors of any young lady as may appeal to you." "I have no need of artificial aids in that respect, sir." "You receive many requests for such commodities?" General Belriose asked with amusement. "Enough. Unfortunately, an uninformed public tends to confuse scholarship with magic, and love life seems to be that factor which requires the largest quantity of magical tinkering. And so it would seem most natural, but I differ from the general public. I connect scholarship with nothing but the means of answering difficult questions. For instance, who are the magicians? The real ones?" Bar seemed startled at the sudden change in their casual conversation to a new tone of seriousness. He answered, "There are no magicians." "Siwenna crawls with the tales of them," Rios said. "There are cults being built about them. There is some strange connection between these stories and those groups of your countrymen who dream of ancient days and what they call liberty and autonomy. Eventually the matter might become a danger to the state." The old man shook his head. "Why ask me? Do you smell rebellion with myself at the head?" "It is not a completely ridiculous thought," Rios replied. "Your father was an exile in his day. You were a patriot in yours. And yet a conspiracy now? I doubt it. Siwenna has had the spirit beat out of it these 3 generations." The old man replied with difficulty, "I shall be as indelicate a host as you a guest. I shall remind you that once a viceroy thought as you did of these spiritless Siwennans. By orders of that viceroy my father became a fugitive pauper, my brothers martyrs, and my sister a suicide. Yet that viceroy died a death sufficiently horrible at the hands of these same slavish Siwennans." "The mysterious death of that viceroy is no mystery to me," Rios said. "There was a young soldier of his personal guard whose actions were of interest. You were that soldier. There is no need of details, I think." Bar was quiet. "What do you propose?" "Patrician, listen to me," Rios said. "These are days when the most successful soldiers are those whose function is to lead the dress parades and to escort the pleasure ships that carry his imperial splendor to the summer planets. I am a failure at 34 because I like to fight. That's why they sent me here. I'm too troublesome at court. I don't fit in with the etiquette. I offend the dandies and the Lord Admirals, but I'm too good a leader of ships and men to be shortly disposed of by being marooned in space. So Siwenna is a substitute. It's a frontier world, a rebellious and a barren province." Bar made no effort to hide his indifference. "How does all this relate to the subject?" "The magicians I've mentioned come from beyond the periphery, from the only quarter where I am free to fight for the glory of the Emperor. But I must know what I fight, and there you can help." "How do you know?" Bar asked. "For 3 years I have traced every rumor, every myth, every breath concerning the magicians. Only 2 isolated facts are unanimously agreed upon. The first is that the magicians come from the edge of the galaxy opposite Siwenna. The second is that your father once met a magician." The aged Siwennan stared unblinkingly, and Rios continued, "You had better tell me what you know." Bar said thoughtfully, "It would be interesting to tell you certain things. It would be my own psychohistoric experiment." "What kind of experiment?" "Psychohistoric." The old man had an unpleasant edge to his smile. Then, crisply, "I'm going to make a bit of a speech. The story begins over 40 years ago, shortly after the Great Massacre, when my father was a fugitive in the forests of the South, while I was a gunner in the Viceroy's personal fleet. This same Viceroy was the one who had ordered the massacre, and who died such a cruel death thereafter. My father was a patrician of the Empire, and a senator of Siwenna. His name was Onumbar. During his exile a wanderer came upon him, a merchant from the edge of the galaxy, who was protected by an individual force shield. An individual force shield, Rios glared. You speak extravagance. What generator could be powerful enough to condense a shield of the size of a single man? Bar said quietly, This is the magician of whom you hear myths, and the proof is more concrete. The generator hangs on the wall behind you, sir. It does not work, but if you look at it, you will see that no one in the Empire ever designed it. Belrios reached for the belt of linked metal that clung to the curved wall. The ellipsoid at the apex of the belt held his attention. It was the size of a walnut. The secret of its workings are beyond discovery now, Bar said. Go on, said the general harshly. I continued my father's researches after he died, and then I learned of Hari Seldon. And who is Hari Seldon? Hari Seldon was a scientist, a psychohistorian, the greatest of them all. Hari Seldon foresaw the decline of imperial power and the eventual barbarization of the entire galaxy. Belrios laughed suddenly. He foresaw what? Then he foresaw wrong. Why, the Empire is more powerful now than it has been in a millennium. Your old eyes are blinded by the cold bleakness of the border. The aged man shook his head somberly. Circulation ceases first at the outer edges. It will take a while yet for the decay to reach the heart. So this Hari Seldon foresaw a galaxy of uniform barbarism, Rios scoffed. And what then, eh? He established two foundations at the extreme opposing ends of the galaxy, foundations of the best, the youngest, and the strongest. They are to breed, grow, and develop. All was arranged in such a way that the future, as foreseen by the unalterable mathematics of psychohistory, would involve their early isolation from the main body of imperial civilization and their gradual growth into the germs of the Second Galactic Empire. And where did you find out all this? It is the painful result of the piecing together of certain evidence discovered by my father and a little more evidence found by myself, said the patrician with composure. It has taken 40 years of research. 40 years. I could settle the question in 40 days by becoming an explorer. I could find this foundation you speak of and observe with my eyes. You say there are two. The records speak of two. Supporting evidence has been found only for one. Well, we'll visit the near one. The general stood. You know where to go? Asked Bar. In a way. In the records of the last viceroy, he whom you murdered so effectively, there are suspicious tales of outer barbarians. As for the information you gave me, I'll know how to thank you for that when I return. Dusimbar followed his guest submissively to the outer door and watched as the general's ground car disappeared. If you return, he said. Belrios was striding impatiently back and forth in his office on the planet Siwenna when the door opened. On the threshold stood Dusimbar. The general motioned for Bar to sit. Patrician, do you recall our discussion half a year ago? Rios sat down and crossed his legs. About your magicians? Bar nodded. Did you find them? Find them? That I did, cried Rios. Patrician, they are not magicians, they are devils. Conceive it. It is a world the size of a fingernail, with resources so petty, power so minute, a population so microscopic as would never suffice the most backward worlds of the dusty prefects of the dark stars. Yet with that, a people so proud and ambitious as to dream quietly and methodically of galactic rule. There is no one to stop them. They have built up a filthy trading community that hurls its tentacles about the systems farther than their toy ships dare reach. Their traders, which is what their agents call themselves, penetrate for parsecs. Dusenbar interrupted the angry flow. How much of this information is definite and how much is simply fury? The general caught his breath and grew calmer. I tell you, I was in worlds nearer to Siwenna than to the Foundation, where the Empire was a myth of the distance, and where traders were living truths. We ourselves were mistaken for traders. Bar's lack of concern was obvious, and Rios leaned forward suddenly to seize the old man's shoulders and stare with curious gentleness into his eyes. He said, "Patrician, I need your help. I frankly admit it." There was a world of urgency in the young man's voice, but Dusenbar shook his head gently and deliberately. Rios said pleadingly, "Whatever you think of the Empire, you will admit its great services. Its armed forces have committed isolated crimes, but in the main they have been a force for peace and civilization. Consider the wars and devastations of those old days, and tell me if, with all its faults, the Empire is not worth preserving." "Is it so bad? So soon?" murmured the Siwenian. "No," admitted Rios. "We would be safe ourselves, no doubt, were our lifetimes quadrupled. But understand the danger of this Foundation. It must be stopped in embryo, or perhaps not at all. You probably know how it might best be attacked, and you can probably forewarn me of its countermeasures." Bar said flatly, "Such help as I could give you means nothing. Not all the might of the Empire could avail to crush this pygmy world." "Why do you say the Empire cannot defeat this small enemy?" The Siwenian looked away from Rios's fixed glare. He spoke heavily. "Because I have faith in the principles of psychohistory. It is a strange science. It reached mathematical maturity with one man, Hari Seldon, and died with him, for no man since has been capable of manipulating its intricacies. But in that short period it has proved itself the most powerful instrument ever invented for the study of humanity. Seldon, the group he worked with, applied psychohistory in full force to the establishment of the Foundation. Place, time, and conditions all conspire mathematically, and so inevitably, to the development of a second galactic empire." Rios's voice trembled with indignation. "You mean that this art of his predicts that I would attack the Foundation and lose such and such a battle? Am I a silly robot following a predetermined course into destruction?" "No," replied the old patrician sharply. "I have already said that the science had nothing to do with individual actions. It is the vaster background that has been foreseen. And if I exercise my prerogative of free will, if I choose to attack next year, or not to attack at all," Bar interrupted. "Attack now or never, with a single ship or all the force in the Empire, by military force or economic pressure. Do whatever you wish in your fullest exercise of free will. You will still lose. Because of Hari Seldon's dead hand. Because of the dead hand of the mathematics of human behavior that can neither be stopped, swerved, nor delayed." The two faced each other in deadlock, until the general stepped back. He said simply, "I'll take that challenge. It's a dead hand against a living will." According to the Encyclopedia Galactica, Cleon II was the last strong emperor of the First Empire. He is important for the political and artistic renaissance that took place during his long reign. He is best known, however, for his connection with Bel Rios, and to the common man he is simply Rios's emperor. Cleon II, Lord of the Universe, suffered from a painful and undiagnosed ailment. The Emperor of the Galaxy and the Lord of all whimpered as he lolled his head into the invigorating plane of force about his pillows. He sat up with difficulty and stared morosely at the distant walls of the grand chamber. It was a bad room to be alone in. It was too big. All the rooms of the imperial palace were too big. But better to be alone during these crippling bouts than to endure the prinking of the courtiers, their lavish sympathy, their soft, condescending dullness. And now Lord Brodrick, his privy secretary, craved audience. The low-born, faithful Brodrick, faithful because he was hated with a unanimous and cordial hatred that was the only point of agreement between the dozen cliques that divided Cleon's court. Brodrick advanced along the crimson carpet, and knelt to kiss the Emperor's limp hand. "Your health, sire?" asked the privy secretary in a low tone of becoming anxiety. "I live," snapped the Emperor with exasperation. "If you can call it a life for every scoundrel who can read a book of medicine uses me as a blank and receptive field for his feeble experiments. I'm sick, and they call my illness unknown. The fools," Cleon said peevishly. "What is it you want? Let's have this over." Brodrick rose from his kneeling posture at a gesture of permission and said, "It concerns General Bel Riose, the military governor of Siwenna." "Riose?" Cleon frowned heavily. "Is he the one who sent that quixotic message requesting permission to enter a career of conquest for the glory of the Empire and the Emperor?" "Exactly, sire." "Did you think I had such generals left me, Brodrick? He seems to be a curious atavism. What was the answer?" "To take no steps involving naval action without further orders from the Imperium." Safe enough. Who is this Riose?" Brodrick nodded, and his mouth twisted ever so little. "He is a dreamer of ancient times, or rather, of the myths of what ancient times used to be. Such men are harmless in themselves, but their queer lack of realism makes them fools for others," he added. "His men, I understand, are completely under his control. He is one of your popular generals." "Is he?" the Emperor mused. "Well, come, Brodrick, I would not wish to be served entirely by incompetence." "An incompetent traitor is no danger. It is rather the capable men who must be watched." "You among them, Brodrick?" Cleon laughed, and then grimaced with pain. "What new development is there in the matter of this young conqueror?" "Another message, sire, has been received from General Riose. He has spied out a barbarian land and advocates an expedition in force. Sire, the man was popular here and is popular there. He is young. If he annexes a vagrant barbarian planet or two, he will become a conqueror. Now a young conqueror who has proven his ability to rouse the enthusiasm of pilots, miners, tradesmen, and such-like rabble is dangerous at any time." Cleon moved an arm hastily and stiffened with pain. Slowly he relaxed, but his smile was weak and his voice a whisper. "You are a valuable subject, Brodrick. You always suspect far more than is necessary, and I have but to take half your suggested precautions to be utterly safe. The young man, I suppose, has made no hostile moves yet?" "He reports none, but already he asks for reinforcements." "Reinforcements?" The Emperor's eyes narrowed with wonder. "What force has he?" 10 ships of the line, sire, with a full complement of auxiliary vessels." 10 ships would seem adequate for any reasonable undertaking. Who are these barbarians he's fighting? The Privy Secretary raised a pair of supercilious eyebrows. He refers to them as the Foundation. The Foundation? What is it? There is no record of it, sire. I have searched the archives carefully. The area of the galaxy indicated falls within the ancient province of Anacreon. There was a vague reference to a group of scientists sent to that province just before its separation from our protection. No word was ever received from that expedition. The Emperor bent a fierce glance at his secretary. "This is most peculiar. To propose to fight savages with 10 ships and to ask for more before a blow is struck. Brodrick, There are complications in this that I can't penetrate. I need a man out there, one with eyes, brains, and loyalty. Brodrig, you go." The secretary bent a submissive head. "And the ships, sire?" "Not yet." The Emperor moaned softly as he gently shifted his position in stages. "Go now, Brodrig, and send in the doctor." From the radiating point of Siwenna, the forces of the Empire reached out cautiously into the black unknown in the periphery. Giant spaceships navigated the vast distances that separated the vagrant stars at the galaxy's rim and felt their way round the outermost edge of Foundation influence. The great ships passed on to weave their line of forward bases further around the Foundation. As each world was conquered and knotted into its proper place in the fabric, the report went back to Bel Rios at the general headquarters he had established on the rocky barrenness of a sunless planet in a cavern filled with light, heat, and artificial air, the single bubble of life on that bleak world. Rios relaxed and smiled grimly at his somewhat unwilling guest, the Siwennian elder Dusembar. "Well, what do you think, patrician?" "I? Of what value are my thoughts? I am not a military man," Barr said. The general turned his chair to the corner, which held a huge, brilliantly transparent sphere that mapped the old imperial prefect of Anacreon and its neighboring sectors. "Those blue stars have been taken over by my forces," said Rios with quiet satisfaction, "and they still advance. No opposition has appeared anywhere, and particularly no opposition has come from Foundation forces. Meanwhile, my forces have been positioned on planets that encircle the Foundation in an enclosing sphere. I can attack from any point." "You still think my forces will fail?" "They must," Barr responded. "And you still adhere to your faith?" "Yes." "Then do so," Rios said irritably. Barr allowed the angry silence to continue for a moment, then asked quietly, "Have you received an answer from the Emperor?" Rios said, "You mean my request for reinforcements?" "It came, but that's all. Just the answer. No ships." "None. I half expected that. Ships are at a premium. The civil wars of the last 2 centuries have smashed up more than half of the Grand Fleet, and what's left is in pretty shaky condition." Barr's eyes were thoughtful and introspective. Psychohistory could have predicted that. In fact, it probably did. "I should say that Hari Seldon's dead hand wins the opening round." Rios answered sharply, "Your Seldon wins nothing. Should the situation turn more serious, then more ships will be available. As yet, the Emperor does not know the whole story." "Indeed? What haven't you told him?" "Obviously your theories." Rios looked sardonic. "The story is, with all respect to you, inherently improbable." The old patrician smiled. "You mean that telling him his august throne is in danger of subversion by a parcel of ragged barbarians from the ends of the universe is not a warning to be believed or appreciated. Then you expect nothing from him." The receiver at the general's hand glowed warmly, and with an unobtrusive jar, a communication cylinder popped into its slot. Rios unrolled it. "You know, we've captured one of these traitor people, alive and with his ship intact." "I've heard talk of it," Barr said. "Well, they've just brought him in, and we'll have him here in a minute. You keep your seat, patrician. I want you here when I'm questioning him. You may understand him where I might miss important points." The door signal sounded, and at the general's touch of a button, the door swung wide. The man who stood on the threshold was tall and bearded. He was accompanied by 3 armed guards. The man stepped in casually and looked about with calculating eyes. He favored the general with a rudimentary wave of the hand. "Your name?" demanded Rios crisply. "Lathan Devers." The man hooked his thumbs into his wide and gaudy belt. "You're a traitor of the Foundation?" "That's right." "Listen, if you're the boss, you better tell your hired men here to lay off my cargo." The general raised his head and regarded the prisoner coldly. "Answer questions. Do not volunteer orders." "All right, I'm agreeable," Devers said. Rios gestured at one of the waiting guards. "You go. The captured ship is to be sealed against all intrusion." "Sit down, Devers." The traitor did so, in the spot indicated, and stolidly withstood the hard scrutiny of the imperial general and the curious glance of the Sewenian patrician. Rios said, "You're a sensible man, Devers. You surrendered your ship when you might have decided to waste our ammunition and have yourself blown to electron dust. It could result in good treatment for you if you continue that sort of outlook on life." "Good treatment is what I mostly crave, boss." "Good. And cooperation is what I mostly crave," Rios smiled. Devers said blandly, "What kind of cooperation are you talking about, boss? To tell you straight, I don't know where I stand." "I've neglected the other half of the introductions. I apologize." Rios was in good humor. "That gentleman is Dusembar, psychologist and patrician of the Empire. I am Bel Rios, peer of the Empire and general in the armed forces of His Imperial Majesty." The traitor's jaw slackened. Then, "The Empire? Huh, funny. I always had sort of the notion it didn't exist anymore." "Look about you. It does," said Rios grimly. "So what's the game, boss?" "The game is war." "Empire versus Foundation, that it?" "Right," Rios confirmed. "Why?" "I think you know why," Rios said. "Ever hear of Hari Seldon?" The traitor regarded him intently. "Yes, I've heard that sort of talk, Seldon, Second Empire, and so on. It's silly stuff, half-baked." The traitor shook his head. "You're wasting your time, but go ahead with your war if it's fables you're after." And Barr spoke for the first time, mildly. "You are so confident, then, that the Foundation will win?" The traitor turned. He flushed faintly. How'd you squeeze that out of what I said, Doc?" Rios nodded very slightly at Barr, and the Sewenian continued in a low voice. "Because the notion would bother you if you thought your world might lose this war and suffer the bitter reapings of defeat. I know. My world once did, and still does." Lathan Devers grew serious. "What's defeat? I've seen wars and I've seen defeats. What if the winner does take over? Who's bothered? Guys like me?" He shook his head in derision. "Get this." Devers spoke forcefully and earnestly. "I spend my life in space for my 5-and-dime gadgets and my beer and pretzel kickback from the combines. Suppose you run the Foundation. You'll still need us. You'll need us more than ever the combines do, because you'd not know your way around, and we could bring in hard cash. We'd make a better deal with the Empire. Yes, we would. And I'm a man of business. If it adds up to a plus mark, I'm for it." And he stared at the two with knowing belligerence. A silence descended, broken only by the noise of a communication cylinder rattling into its slot. Rios flipped it open and silently read the message. "Prepare plan indicating position of each ship in action. Await orders on full-armed defensive." He reached for his cape. As he fastened it about his shoulders, he whispered in a stiff-lipped monotone to Barr, "I'm leaving this man to you. I expect results. This is war, and I can be cruel to failures. Remember." He left, with a salute to both. Lathan Devers looked after him. "Well, something's hit him where it hurts." "What goes on?" "A battle, obviously," said Barr gruffly. "The forces of the Foundation are coming out for their first battle. You'd better come along." Devers and the proud old Sewenian patriarch were followed out of the room by the remaining guards. The room to which they were led was smaller, bare. It contained 2 beds, a visi-screen, and sanitary facilities. The guards marched out, and the thick door boomed hollowly shut. "What's your game, Doc?" Devers asked warily. "You're in my charge, that's all." Yeah? But you're in this cell with me, and when you were marched here, the guns were pointed just as hard at you as at me. Devers waited, but got no answer. He tried another tack. All right, let me ask you something. You said your world was licked once. By whom? Barr looked up. By the Empire. That's so. Then what are you doing here? Barr maintained an eloquent silence. The traitor thrust out a lower lip and nodded his head slowly. He slipped off a flat-linked bracelet that hugged his right wrist and held it out. What do you think of that? He wore the mate to it on his left wrist. The Sewenian took the ornament. He responded slowly to the traitor's gesture to put it on. Barr closed the bracelet around his wrist and instantly felt an odd tingling, which passed quickly. Devers' voice changed at once. Just speak casually. If this room is wired, they won't get a thing. That's a field distorter you've got there. Hold your lips still when you talk, and take it easy. You've got to get the trick of it. Dusenbar was suddenly weary. What do you want? The words slurred from between unmoving lips. I've told you, you make mouth noises like those we call patriots, yet your own world has been mashed up by the Empire. And here you are playing ball with the Empire's fair-haired general. Doesn't make sense, does it? You want the Empire to win? The old Sewenian patrician lashed out furiously. May the Empire and all its works perish in universal catastrophe. All Sewenna praise that daily. But I have children now, grandchildren. The general knows where to find them. Barr continued in a whisper, but that would not stop me if the results in view warranted the risk. They would know how to die. The traitor said gently, You know, I'm aware of a few things. We once had a mayor, Hober Mallow his name was. He visited Sewenna. He met a man named Barr. Dusenbar stared hard, his suspicion apparent. What do you know of this? What every traitor on the Foundation knows. You might be a smart old fella put in here to get on my right side. Then I'd fall all over you and pour out my heart to you, and wouldn't the general be pleased? But just the same, I'd like to have you prove that you're the son of Onum Barr of Sewenna. Dusenbar's hand shook as he opened the flat metal box in a wall recess. The metal object he withdrew clanked softly as he thrust it into the traitor's hands. Devers stared. He held the ellipsoid at the apex of the belt close to his eyes and swore softly. He looked up and smiled. Shake, Doc. A man-sized nuclear shield is all the proof I need. And he held out his large hand. Broderick's uniform was stately, carefully tailored, and as carefully worn, and in his hand he carried an elegant ivory staff. His walk through the gardens of the obscure planet Wanda, now temporary Imperial headquarters, was leisurely. His expression was somber. Riose offered a cigarette to Broderick. We do not underestimate the importance of the campaign, Broderick said, although it would seem that too great an emphasis is being placed upon its difficulty. Riose flushed, but he maintained his equilibrium. I cannot risk the lives of my men, who are few enough, or the destruction of my ships, which are irreplaceable, by a too rash attack. You have questioned the traitor, Broderick asked. I have. It has been useful, but not vitally so. His ship is tiny, of no account. Naturally, there is a good deal about the ship and its workings which I do not understand. I have already sent for clever men who can understand the workings of the odd nuclear field circuits the ship contains. I have received no answer. Men of that type cannot be spared, General. Surely there must be one man of your vast province who understands nucleics. Were there such a one, I would have him heal the limping motors that power 2 of the ships of my small fleet, leaving me with only 8 ships to fight a major battle. Broderick's fingers fluttered impatiently. Your position is not unique in that respect. The Emperor has similar troubles." The general shrugged. "Well, it is beside the immediate point, this lack of first-class tech men. Except that I might have made more progress with my prisoner were my psychic probe in proper order." Broderick's eyebrows lifted. "You have a probe?" "An old one. I set it up during the prisoner's sleep and received nothing." Broderick leaned on his staff. "I shall see if a specialist is available in the capital. In the meanwhile, what of this other man, this Sewenian? You keep too many enemies in your good graces." "He knows the Foundation. I keep him for the help he may afford me." "But he is a Sewenian, and the son of a proscribed rebel. He is old and powerless, and his family acts as hostage." "I see. I think that I should speak to this traitor myself." "Certainly," Rios said. "Alone," the secretary added coldly, making his point. "Certainly," repeated Rios blandly. "However, since the traitor is at the permanent base, you will have to leave the front areas at an interesting moment." "Yes? Interesting in what way?" "Interesting in that within the week, the 20th Fleet, having completely circled the Foundation, advances inward toward the core of resistance." Rios smiled and turned away. In a vague way, Broderick felt punctured. Suppose I blasted him," Devers sneered. "Whom? Rios?" Barr asked. "Yes." Even as they ate their sparse dinner rations in their cramped cell, the two captives conspired. Barr sighed. His aging eyes were troubled with the reflection of the long past. "Assassination isn't the way out, Devers. I once tried it under provocation when I was 20, but it solved nothing. I removed a villain from Siwenna, but not the imperial yoke, and it was the imperial yoke, not the villain, that mattered." "But Rios is not just a villain, Doc. He's the whole blamed army. Would fall apart without him." "Even so, there are other armies and other leaders. You must go deeper. There is this Lord Broderick, for instance. No one more than he has the ear of the Emperor. He could obtain hundreds of ships where Rios must struggle with 10. I know him by reputation. He is the Emperor's adviser in all things, and the Emperor's tool in the worst things. There is not a man in the Empire as subtle in villainy, or as crude in his pleasures." "Wow." Devers pulled thoughtfully at his neatly trimmed beard. I have an idea. Suppose this Broderick takes a dislike to our young army hero. The Emperor might hear about it, and Rios might be in trouble." Quite likely. But how do you propose to get that to happen?" "I don't know," Devers said, "but I intend to try a little bribery when I'm in the private audience he has summoned me to tomorrow." The patrician laughed gently. "Even if you reach his scale, it wouldn't be worth it. There's probably no one so easily bribed, but he lacks even the fundamental honesty of honorable corruption. He doesn't stay bribed, not for any sum. Think of something else." The next morning, Lathan Devers was escorted by armed guards to Command Center. He was prepared to meet a monster, and was surprised to find instead the very picture of a court dandy, protected by a pair of bravos with bared guns and hard scowls. The stiff, tight lines of Broderick's sheened and immaculate costume gave him the illusion of height, from the very top of which his cold, emotionless eyes stared down the declivity of a long nose at the traitor. Broderick drew forth a chair, dusted it carefully with the iridescent square of fabric attached to the top of his ivory stick, and seated himself. "Are you really a citizen of this barbarian world that is creating all this fury of military frenzy?" demanded Broderick. Devers nodded gravely. "It seems that our general here is fighting an apparently meaningless war with frightful transports of energy, and this over a forsaken flea-bite of a world at the end of nowhere, which to a logical man would not seem worth a single blast of a single gun. Yet the general is not illogical. On the contrary, I would say he was extremely intelligent. Do you follow me? Can't say I do, sir, Devers replied. Broderick inspected his fingernail and said, Listen further, then. The general would not waste his men and ships on a sterile feat of glory. There is something else more than glory here, and he does take queer, unnecessary care of you. Now, if you were my prisoner, and told me as little of use as you have our general, I would slit open your abdomen and strangle you with your own intestines. Devers remained wooden. His eyes moved slightly, first to one of Broderick's bully boys, then to the other. They were ready, eagerly ready. Broderick smiled. Well, now, you're a silent devil. According to the general, even a psychic probe make no impression. I have a psychic probe, one that ought to suit you peculiarly well. You see this? And between thumb and forefinger he held out intricately designed pink and yellow rectangles. It looks like cash, Devers said. Cash it is, the best cash of the empire, for it is backed by my estates, which are more extensive than the emperor's own. 100,000 credits, all here, between two fingers. Yours. For what, sir? I'm a good trader, but all trades go in both directions. For what? For the truth. What is the general after? Why is he fighting this war? Lathan Devers sighed, and smoothed his beard thoughtfully. In a word, the Empire. How ordinary. It always comes to that in the end. But how? What is the road that leads from the galaxy's edge to the peak of empire so broadly and invitingly? The Foundation, said Devers, has secrets. They have books, old books, so old that the language they are in is only known to a few of the top men. But the secrets are shrouded in ritual and religion, and none may use them. And these old secrets? Come, for 100,000 I deserve the intimate details. The transmutation of elements,